بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحان لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم رب زدني علما. So we continue with our class on awakening the hearts. Tonight we will talk about fear and hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having a balance between them. If I tell you to tell me about fear of Allah, most of us are pretty good at that. We're like, oh yeah, I know that. If I tell you what is the true meaning of fear, we probably don't really know. We just think it kind of means being scared senseless. And then if I ask you what does it mean to have hope in Allah, we probably don't really know what that means either. So we will go over that inshallah. So he says here, Imam Ghazali, that fear and hope are two wings of a bird, which are going to get you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you have to have both to go towards Allah. If you only have one, it's not going to work. If you only have one of these wings. So I like to give this example. Let's say somebody comes in here and they tell us that we have received divine revelation that all of us are going to paradise. What are we going to do? We'll be out of here in 2 seconds. You won't even wait for me to finish the class. You'll be out of here. You'll get straight in the car, you'll drive up, and you'll do anything you can imagine. And you know why you're going to do that? Because you're already going to Jannah. And you know why I know you're going to do that? Because I'll be right there with you. I'll be right behind. Because it doesn't matter. We're already going, so who cares? Now let's say the same person comes in and they say, everybody here, wa na'udhu billah, everybody here is going to Jahannam. You know what we're going to do in that case? You're still going to get up and leave. You know why? Because what does it matter now? Might as well live it up for the few years you have left. Because whatever we do, we're doomed, so why not just do whatever we want? So in both cases, we're going to do whatever we want. And that's why we need to have a balance of the hope in Allah and the fear in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Basically hope in Allah is when our hearts have this serenity because we are waiting to see or meet who we love. And who do we love the most? Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we cannot just be one-dimensional in our thought process. Unfortunately, the way many of us are raised, we are raised on an incredible amount of fear. To the point that it's almost an unhealthy fear that you almost assume the worst of everything you're doing. You assume the worst in your ibadah. So think of the fear of Allah as like a healthy respect. You have to have some fear. Like you have to have some fear of the teacher, otherwise you're just going to cheat. You have to have some fear of your parents, otherwise you're going to do whatever you want. You're not going to be disciplined. So there always has to be a balance of hope and a balance of fear. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in surah number 23, verse number 60, those who give what they are given and their hearts are وَقُلُوبُهُمْ وَجِلَةٌ, their hearts shake. Now, if you think of who these kind of people are, you're probably going to think, oh, these are people that commit all kinds of wrongs, right? And so, Aisha radiallahu anha, she asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that somebody whose heart is shaking out of fear, is this somebody who steals? Is this somebody who commits fornication? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, this is actually a person who fasts and prays and gives charity and is fearful that maybe it's not accepted. So it's not somebody who is committing major sins. It's somebody who's doing good, but they are afraid, is it going to be accepted or not? And that's a mark of a successful person, is that you continue to move forward rather than looking at what you did in the past. What happens to people who live off of their past? Are they successful in the future? No. How many years have Laker fans been living in the past? Probably going on 10 years now, right? And we always say what? Next year is our year. And then we say, when the next year passes, we say what? Next year is our year. You keep living in the past, you don't move forward. Now, let's say that Let's say Apple, for example. Let's say Apple says, you know what, we're not going to design anything new in our phone. How long are they going to stay at the top of the market? Not very long. In fact, even for the new iPhone 10, which is ridiculously expensive, they didn't really do much new, did they? And they got torn apart for it. So successful people continue to move forward. So the mark of the successful believer is you do something good, you do some good deed, and then you know what you do? You do it again. You don't sit there and admire yourself. There's a story in fiction. Anybody heard of Pygmalion? Anybody? No? So Pygmalion was a character in fiction where basically what he does is he makes a statue of himself. And then he falls in love with himself. So he admires himself so much that he just thinks he's the greatest, the best person. So when you do something like that, you're not going to improve, are you? You're going to be stuck in a rut. And so that's what's going to happen. Okay? So this is important to keep in mind. Now, you know the value of a thing when you look at the opposite of it. So what is the opposite of fear? The opposite of fear is to be completely carefree. So when we look at the opposite of a characteristic, we often know how negative it is. So if you're carefree, then that's negative because that means you're not living with any rules in your life. If you don't have any fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all, then you're going to do whatever you want, as we mentioned. And what is the opposite of hope? To be hopeless. Okay, so if you're hopeless, then that's not very healthy either. Now, one of Shaitan's names is Iblis. And Iblis comes from root letters which mean to lose hope. Because Shaitan has lost hope in Allah's mercy because he's not going anywhere. He's not going to succeed. So what he tries to do is he tries to come to all of us and make us lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that we despair, we think that we're not going to succeed, and we just say this is too hard, it's so hard to be Muslim, it's so hard to wear hijab, it's so hard to eat halal, it's so hard to make my prayer at school, it's so hard to be honest, it's so difficult to lower your gaze, and you say, oh, it's not realistic in this time, and then you start losing hope that you can practice and losing, and Shaitan is smiling all the way to the hellfire. Okay? So that is the opposite of having hope. Okay? So you have to have obviously both. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many, many places in the Quran, He will mention both. So He says in Surah number 21, verse number 9, وَيَدْعُونَنَا رَغَبًا وَرَهَبًا. When the believers make dua, they make it out of hope and out of fear. So they have the balance of both. Because many times fear will take us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also hope in His mercy will take us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A lot of times when we lose hope completely, who do we turn back to? We turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I work with drug addicts at a addiction center. So the first message is, kids, don't do drugs. It messes you up, okay? But you will see people, they have reached the lowest level of desperation because they've lost everything. And I don't work with people who are off the street. These are people who are highly educated, successful in their business, and they've lost everything. Their families have fallen apart. They're losing their businesses. They've lost their friendships. And they're in such desperation, where do they turn to? They turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not all Muslim, but they turn to a higher power because there's no other place to turn to. In all that desperation, you will hear God over there probably more than you'll hear in the masjid. Because that's what you have to do sometimes when people get desperate. So this is what the believers do. Allah also says in Surah number 32, verse 16, يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا, that they supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, fearful and hopeful. So fearful that it's not enough, but hopeful that it will be accepted. So if you don't have both, then it's going to be very stressful. Sometimes actually hope in the Quran comes with the meaning of fear, and He says because they are linked together. Okay. So for example, there's a lot of virtue which is mentioned for shedding a tear. And that shedding of a tear usually comes out of fear, but it also gives you hope because of what you get out of shedding that tear. So Allah says, for example, in Surah 53, verse 59 through 61, أَفَمِنْ هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ تَعْجَبُونَ وَتَضْحَكُونَ وَلَا تَبْكُونَ وَأَنْتُمْ سَامِدُونَ. That is it from this speech, from the Quran, that you are, mesmerized, but you laugh and you don't cry at it. And you continue to be in a state of وَأَنْتُمْ سَامِدُونَ, play. In other words, you're heedless. So you're not taking the message when you and I should be taking the message. And he also said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the fire of hell will not touch anyone who cried from the fear of Allah until literally the milk is returned to the udder of an animal, which is, I don't even know if that's possible to do that. So that is the reward for shedding a tear from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, anybody here ever had like a good cry in their life recently? I know no one's going to raise their hand, but I'm telling you what, when you get like a good cry, it feels really good. It's like, you just feel something, your like lip starts to quiver and stuff like, one of those things, and then it just kind of comes out. It feels really good. And if you can do that out of the fear of Allah, then even better. Remember, there are 7 people who are shaded on the Day of Judgment. 7 are shaded on the Day of Judgment. The one that's kind of mentioned at the end or isn't talked about too much is the person who sheds a tear alone in solitude in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the tear comes down, the eyes fill with tears when they are alone in front of Allah. This person will be protected on the Day of Judgment. Now, why are they shedding tears? They're shedding tears because they regret what they've done. They're shedding tears because they are fearful of Allah's punishment. But at the same time, we're taking hope because we know if you can do that, then we will be shaded, inshaAllah, from the hellfire. We will be from, and may Allah make us from all 7, inshaAllah. Abdullah ibn Umar, he used to say, radiallahu anhuma, he used to say that a tear from the fear of Allah is more beloved to me than spending 1,000 dinar. So in other words, giving an excessive amount of charity, it is more valuable to me to shed a tear because it is, and I'm talking about real tears, not those crocodile tears, right? Not like fake tears, but genuine tears for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now then he asks the question, okay, so which one's better? Is it which one is better and which one should we have more of? Should we have more hope or should we have more fear? What do you think? What's the answer? What do you think? Fear? Who says fear? Raise your hands. Who says hope? Who says a balance of both? That's a trick question. Okay. So he says, how do you balance them? Okay, so which one is better? He asked the question. So he gives a comparison. It says, he said it's like comparing which one's better, bread or water. Which one's better, bread or water? But it depends. What if I'm not thirsty and I'm dying of hunger? Then the bread is better. What if I'm dying of thirst and I'm not hungry? Then the water is better. So it's hard to really say which one's better. It depends on the situation. And so he says, is fear better or is hope better? It depends on the situation. Some of us operate better when we have a fear of something. Some of us would operate better if we had hope in Allah's mercy. So it depends on the person. Okay, and he says very nicely, he said we shouldn't say one is better than the other. We should say which one is aslah, which one is going to rectify our condition more, and that's what we should focus on. Okay, so it will be different for different people. So Ali, and then he gives some nice sayings of the pious predecessors. So Ali radiallahu anhu, he used to say to his son, he said, "O my son, fear Allah such that if you came to him with all of these good rewards, which are as much as all of the people in the earth, he wouldn't accept it from you. He wouldn't accept it. And you should have so much hope in Allah that if you came with all of the sins of the people of the earth, that you would hope what? That you're forgiven. So that is the balance that he's saying, so that you keep going. Omar radiallahu anhu used to say that if somebody is called to enter the hellfire, or if all the people are called to enter the hellfire, except for one person, meaning only one person is going to Jannah, I'm hopeful that I'm that one person. And if everybody is called, or if everybody's called to enter paradise except for one person, then I'm afraid that I might not be that one person. So in both cases, there's a balance of hope and there's a balance of fear between the two things. And a lack of extremes. You know, Umar radiallahu anh, he used to ask Hudhayfa radiallahu anh that there are signs of the hypocrites. He used to ask him, tell me what they are so I know whether I'm a hypocrite or not. This is what Umar radiallahu anh is saying. So, because he was concerned. Now we know that Umar radiallahu anh is, like, who doesn't know who he is? You know, and we know, of course, if your name is Umar, you know, you must be a very intelligent person, mashallah, if your name is Umar. So, we know who he is, but he is afraid whether it's going to be accepted. Now, you remember that book by Michael Hart, the 100 most influential people in history? Who was number one? The Prophet ﷺ. Who was number 50? Umar radiallahu anh. We know who's number one. We don't know who's number 50. Number 50 is Umar. Now, keep in mind, Michael Hart, his background is very disturbing. He's like a white supremacist. Like literally, he is. Like if you look into that, it's very disturbing. So it means even more that he would pick the Prophet ﷺ as one and Umar radiallahu anh as number 50. So that's who he was. You know, when we think of Umar, we think strength, we think courage, and he was all of those. But what really made him a complete man was the humbleness that he had. Was the fear he had of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was also that combination of strength and that combination of softness, which is not a weakness. It's not a weakness. So that's who he was, radiallahu anhu. So this is the state that we're in, right? And we can't go to extremes of either, otherwise we will stop functioning and we will stop doing good deeds. And if we stop doing that, then we're not going to have any chance of success. Now, he says here that generally speaking, he says, fear is better before death. Because it will kind of keep you honest. It's like somebody is always watching over you or something like that. Okay? Like they give now in the city, right? They have the camera tickets. Anybody gotten a camera ticket? How much you pay for it? $250? So I ran one in Beverly Hills when I used to work here. You know how much it was? $444. And I'm like, why do people in Beverly Hills need $444? That's the first question that I asked. But like that, so that that camera was there and it was watching. It was watching and it took. Now, if I am ever driving there again, I'm going to be very cautious because I know that somebody's watching. So he's saying that before death, fear is better. Fear will keep you going. But when death comes close, then you want to have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you know the end is near. Okay? And of course, none of us know when that is. But may Allah protect us, if you get some sort of a terminal illness or something like that, you probably know your days are more limited. Okay? If you're getting up in age, you probably know your days are more limited. So then you should start to have more hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not less. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said that let not one of you die, meaning approaching death, except that he is a good opinion with Allah. So you're always hoping that everything will be okay, not that it's going to be doom and gloom. And Allah says in what's called a hadith Qudsi. Hadith Qudsi is the words said of Allah, or Allah saying the words but not the Quran. So the Prophet ﷺ, sometimes he would say it verbatim from what Allah revealed. Sometimes he would put it on his own words, but it is directly from Allah, but it's not the Quran. He said, Ana inda dhanni abdi bi. I am in the opinion of my servant. So however you think Allah is, that's how you're going to find Him. If you think Allah is going to forgive you, and if you think He's merciful, then that's how He's going to be. If you think He's waiting to get you, if you think that He's going to make your life miserable, if you think that you're not going to be able to get through the day, then that's how you're going to find Allah. So I am in the opinion of my servant, Allah says. It's a very important hadith to keep in mind. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, when he was close to death, he said to his son, just tell me about hope and tell me things which will give me a good opinion of Allah. Don't tell me about anything else. Don't be telling me about the hellfire when I'm close to death. Tell me about what is going to give me hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he then goes into different types of fear. Now, when it comes to Allah, there is one type of fear which is fear from His punishment. Right? So you don't want to be punished by Allah, so you fear one thing. The second type of punishment is to actually have fear of Allah Himself. So you're not focusing on the punishment part, you're more focused on letting down Allah. Right? It's like your parents may punish you, but if you didn't do well on the test, it's not that you're concerned with the punishment, but you're more concerned that you let them down in the first place. Everybody see the difference? So you're more concerned, you have more fear of Allah Himself rather than His actual punishment. And so the having the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself, this is for the learned people. Okay? This is for learned people. Allah says in Surah number 35, verse 28, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Those who really truly fear Allah are the ulama. Ulama could mean scholars, but it could mean people who are learned. Because the more you learn, the more you're supposed to have fear of Allah. Not less. Now sometimes people learn a lot, and then they still have some very shady behavior. And so you ask yourself, how can someone so learned be doing things like this? Well, because they didn't really truly learn in the first place. Whoever said that learning in Islam, when we talk about ilm in Islam does not mean getting information. That's what you do in school and regurgitate it on the test, right? Just parrot back what they say. That's not what ilm is in Islam. In Islam, ilm or learning is to learn the material. Of course, you have to get the information, but then you internalize and you practice it. So what if I tell you 30 hadith on why you shouldn't lie if you go out and lie? You didn't really learn anything in the Islamic sense of the word. Okay? So this is the fear of learned people. And the more you know, then the more that we are going to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the more it will spark us to do good deeds. And the less we know, then the less we're going to be. So that's why some people will be doing all sorts of crazy things. And if they don't have the knowledge, then they're not going to even consider it a big thing. And that's very problematic. Okay? So this is the fear that we are aspiring to get to. Now, what about, what leads to a bad ending? So, when we come towards the end of our life, we always ask for what's called husnul khatima, which means a good ending. So to die on iman. We don't want to die in a state of disbelief. And all of us will be يُبْعَثُ كُلُّ عَبْدٍ عَلَى مَا مَاتَ عَلَيْهِ. Everybody will be resurrected in the state that they died. So that means that if you died in prayer, then you will be resurrected praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like the Sahaba who died during Hajj, And the Prophet ﷺ said that he will be resurrected saying the talbiyah, labbaik Allahumma labbaik. That's a good way to be resurrected, because it's going to be chaos after resurrection. People are going to be running everywhere. The earth is going to be shaking. The skies are going to be splitting apart. It's going to be chaos. So at that time, you want to try to remain as stable as you can. And so how our life ended, that's going to determine what kind of state we are raised in. Now, there's going to be people who OD'd taking drugs at the club. People who died in a state of drunkenness. That's how they're going to be raised. I remember there was a Muslim brother. This is how he died. He died in the club. He had marijuana and all kinds of drugs around him, and he had, other people that don't do very honorable things with themselves. This is how he died. So this is how we be resurrected. When you go to sleep, some people, the last thing that they see before they go to sleep is late night television. A lot of infomercials out there. Some people read their du'as. Well, guess what happens when you read your du'as and then you go to sleep? Then what state are you going to be resurrected in if you die in your sleep? In a state of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they call sleep, they call it the little death. Because when you sleep, you are literally, you're dead. I mean, you're out. So when you wake, and that's why, what do we say when we wake up, right? We make the du'as for waking up. So we woke up from this minor death. But one day will come when we're not going to wake up in this world. We're going to wake up when everything is done. So that is why we always wish for a good ending. Okay? Now, a bad ending can also be something where we lost our faith. May Allah protect us. We see we have a lot of stories. A lot of us deal with these issues. People losing their iman. And, if nothing is done about it, then that's how they're going to end up being raised. So you could have somebody who dies on hypocrisy. And the Sahaba were very concerned about dying in a state of hypocrisy. Now, when you think hypocrisy, you just think, it's somebody who's hiding their Islam and then being different on the outside. That's not what we should be concerned about. Our concern is the characteristics of the people of hypocrisy. That's what our concern is. So what are they? The Prophet ﷺ mentioned them. For example, when they speak, they lie. So nobody will say that, I'm not a hypocrite. I believe in Allah. I'm not hiding anything on the inside. That was more common during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where they would they would externally be Muslim, but internally they would be complete hypocrites. Okay? Most people nowadays, or many, are not like that, but they still may have the characteristics. So when the person speaks, they lie. When they make a promise, they break it. They break their promises. This is a sign of hypocrisy. When I was at our masjid, I remember it was donation time. And so I just made a comment that from the signs of the hypocrites is when you make a promise, you break it. And so I said that people who pledge and didn't pay, what have they done? They've broken their promise. And then I was talking about the signs of hypocrisy. That didn't go over too well with one community member. Okay? And so he wasn't very happy about that. But if you promised and then you broke it, that is a sign of a hypocrite. Now, he probably, if he paid what he owed, then alhamdulillah. Otherwise, he didn't learn anything. But this is definitely, when you're given a trust, then you break it. Right? That's another sign of a hypocrite. So somebody entrusted you with something. Don't tell anybody this. This is just between us. And then you go and you tell the whole world. So then you've broken it. This is a sign of a hypocrite. So imagine if we had these things, you have a contract and you break it. If this is the state that we die in, then you would die on hypocrisy. May Allah protect us. And then you would have the worst of endings during resurrection. So we may hope that we may die with a good opinion and hope in Allah, but if we've been doing the complete opposite, then that's not the state that we're going to die in. One of the ways to tell whether there is some hypocrisy in your heart is how are you by yourself versus in front of people. What do you watch when you're alone? in front of the computer? What do you listen to when others are around and when others are not around? You know, when we're all out here like this, hey, see, Allahu Akbar, takbir. Very easy. But what happens when you're gone? What do you listen? What do you entertain yourself with? Who do you speak to? How do you dress? Where do you go? If you have this completely different personality, then this is a sign of hypocrisy. So it's certainly not a small matter. It's basically, your tongue and your heart there's an ikhtilaf. There's a difference, right? You say one thing, but on the inside you are something else. And we have a lot of people like this in our society. We call them politicians. We call them politicians. Most politicians will say something, say anything to get elected, but they have some other agenda on the inside. And this is why you can see why most of the great scholars in the history of Islam, all of the great imams, they didn't get involved with these people because they know it's going to lead to compromise. Now, I'm not saying to not get in politics, not be involved in politics and all that, so don't misunderstand me. But what I'm saying is that to just aspire to be in that position, it's going to entail a lot of compromise. You know, somebody made a great point. You know, we as Muslims, we get really excited about the national election. And we neglect what? The local election. What has the most impact on the Muslim community is the local election. I can tell you right now in our community, we've had the road expanded. We've had one of the council members, actually, there was hail damage on the roof. He went to the court and he won money for the fixing. He won that lawsuit and he didn't charge us anything for his services. These are tangible things that happen right in front of us. Now, if we go to the national level, I don't know if ever in my lifetime any president has really done anything that has been so wonderful for Muslims. I don't know, but we get so excited about it, right? So this is the problem, because the higher up you go, the more you're going to compromise. Whereas locally, that still happens, but you will still see a greater impact. So it's very important to be involved locally, and that's much more important than the national level. Okay. Now, what are some of the reasons for actually having a bad ending, or su'ul khatima? Okay. So you could actually be somebody who on the outward looks like they're actually doing a good job and not be a hypocrite, but you could still die in a bad state. How is that possible? One example would be the people of what's called bid'ah, innovation. What do we say every single Jum'ah? What does the khatib say? وَكُلَّ مُحْدَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ وَكُلَّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. Every innovation is misguidance, and every misguidance leads to the hellfire. So innovation in religion, a bid'ah, a simple example. We say that Fajr is 2 rak'ah. So we'll come here tomorrow. What time is Fajr tomorrow? 5:30. Okay, good. You were paying attention to the announcement. So we come tomorrow and we say, you know what? Today for Fajr, we're going to pray 4 rak'ah. So what do you mean we're going to pray 4 rak'ah? Yeah, 4 rak'ah. You see, 2 rak'ah. Imagine the reward we get from Allah. What we're going to do, we're going to double that. So 2 more rak'ah means double the reward, of course. That's called a bid'ah. That's called an innovation in religion, because that's not what the Prophet ﷺ did. So we can't come and add things. We say, this Ramadan, I'm going to start fasting 3 days early and end 3 days later. I'm going to do 36 fasts. These are innovations in religion. So you could be moving along in your life and you could seem to be very pious, but if you die in this state, it may seem like you're doing a good thing, but in reality you are not. So this is one reason or way that we can have a bad ending. The other, of course, is because of weakness in iman. Like in essence, it's weakness in iman. So what happens is that the love of this world becomes more dominant than the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So nobody is saying that you don't love Allah, but you don't love Him as much as the dunya. You don't love Him as much as all the things that you have. And you're ready to sell it out in a second. That's what they call scholars for dollars. You know, I actually went to school with somebody who was a scholar, and he told me he was offered $30,000 to give a fatwa one time. He turned it down, but these things happen. One time I made a joke in our masjid that, you know, in like the Arab lands, they only have one mufti. They call him a grand mufti, the person who gives fatwas. You know why they call him a grand mufti? Yeah, because you give him a grand and he'll give you any fatwa that you want. So I'm glad you guys are laughing. One of the brothers was not laughing. And so he came afterwards, and then I had to do some damage control after. But the point is that in that case, it's not like that person doesn't believe in Allah or doesn't care, but the dunya is more tempting, and that matters more. So it's more important for me to be on my phone or play video games or watch my Netflix series, and if I miss the time of the prayer, okay, that's fine. I'll just pray it later. I'm not praying. I'll just pray it later, even if the time passes. So the love of this world is more dominant over the other one. Okay? And that really is not a strong attachment, because people like that are not going to last very long. Okay? So it can be, you know, you can have different types of these things. Okay? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you would stay in the hellfire forever if you die in this state, because every believer will eventually get out of the hellfire. But considering that we can't even stand next to an oven for 2 minutes, this is not the attitude of the believer that, well, we'll just be in there for a few days. Right? Seriously, if we got into the intensity of the hellfire, you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. The person who has caused you the most trouble in your life, you would not wish it on them. And that's why our attitude should be with our classmates, with our co-workers, is that we have this gift of Islam and we are trying to present it to them in the best of ways. We don't walk in there thinking that we're better than anybody else. Okay? So, you know, we have to be very, very careful about these things. So now, what are the things we can do about it? What can we do to increase our fear in Allah and to increase our hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So one thing is that when you read the Quran, you have to pay very close attention. You're going to see when Allah mentions paradise, what do you think He mentions right after? Hellfire. And when He mentions hellfire first, what do you think He mentions after? Paradise. And when He mentions the people of the hellfire, what does He mention right after? The people of Jannah. And when He mentions the people of Jannah, what does He mention after? People of the hellfire. So why is He doing that? Because of the balance, right? It's that whole balance that we've been talking about. That's why He's doing it in the first place. Now, for some reason, a lot of people miss all of that. And then you end up with people who are detached and who just, to be frank, they just don't really have any care for the deen anymore. Because they're like, you just told me my whole life I'm going to hell, and that's it. So that is very unhealthy, you know. It was I think it was Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Yeah, he used to say that if you can't cry in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then try or act like you are. And it's very interesting because in psychology, this is what they tell you to do. It's what we call fake it till you make it. So if you can't do something, act like you can. And that will lead you to, inshallah, doing it one day. So maybe right now you can't do something. Maybe right now you can't even sit and read Quran for 5 minutes. Tomorrow, you make wudu, you sit, act like you're going to read half the Quran right there. And then you're going to start, and you're going to get through, and you're going to think 3 hours have passed by, and you're going to look down, it's like, okay, 1 minute and 45 seconds. But at least you started. And then the next day it'll get easier, and the next day it'll get easier, and the next day it'll get easier. So you try. I had a family member who, you know, obviously he knew English and everything, but he would make some grammatical mistakes in his English. But he spoke with so much confidence that you didn't even care. right? Like he was just going to act like he just owned the language. And when you're learning a language and you don't speak like that, then what happens? Then you make even more mistakes. Because you kind of get shy and you don't really speak up and people are like, what did you say? So fake it, act like you know what it is. Act like you know what you're doing. And then inshallah it will have an effect on you. The final thing he mentions is some of the fear of the messengers of Allah. So the Prophet ﷺ, whenever the wind would get really harsh, his face actually used to change. It would change kind of in color, and he would stand and he would kind of walk around because of fear of what may happen. Because there was an intense wind. Now we do some weird stuff in America. What do we do when the wind gets really intense or there's like a tornado? We get out and we go and we record it. Storm chasers, like only in America would people go out and let's go record it. Let's take a selfie in front of it before it comes and kills us all. Like I don't understand why we do that. One time in Egypt there was a very vicious sandstorm, and it looked like it's like one of the scariest things you've ever seen in your life. And the people actually thought that the day of judgment was coming. Like it was that intense. So when these things happen, and there are du'as for this as well, so the Prophet ﷺ, realizing the damage and the greatness of what could happen, was always fearful of these things. I used to be afraid of earthquakes, but earthquakes are not, I guess, as big a deal. Yeah, they don't give you a warning, but if you see like tornadoes and floods and stuff, that's some serious stuff. What happened in Houston, it was horrible, right? Alhamdulillah, we didn't get hit and we weren't that far, but it was devastating. People lost everything, things that are irreplaceable. So this is an indication of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the Prophet ﷺ would enter prayer, you could hear like almost a ringing from his chest because of the intensity of what he felt when he was reading. And the Prophet ﷺ, one time he asked Jibreel, he said, what is it? I've never seen Mikael, the angel Mikael, he never laughs or smiles. And Jibreel, he said that Mikael has not laughed since the hellfire has been created. Because of knowing that people are going to go, and because of seeing it, just can't laugh anymore. Okay? So these are just a couple of examples. So certainly, this is a topic which is important to understand. Alhamdulillah, in our tradition, we have it really explained out in detail. And that's one of the purposes of this class. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us balance between the fear and between the hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Pay close attention when you are reading Quran. Look at how Allah balances these things out. And that's what it really is all about at the end of the day. So if you have done a lot of things you feel you shouldn't have done, and you're feeling really down, then you should know that just with a moment of sincerity, that Allah will wipe everything clean. And if you are doing good work, then you should also know that in a moment, if you start thinking how great I am and how on a Friday night I'm here and I'm learning and I'm so good, that He can wipe out all that good in just a second. And so knowing both of these things wherever we always are between hope and we are always between fear, and this is the healthier way to understand. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a balance between hope and between hope in His mercy and fear of His punishment.